This summer past, we journeyed to Prague, Czechoslovakia, to attend the International Transpersonal Conference, a meeting of philosophers, psychologists, anthropologists, writers, ecologists, and thinkers on global subjects. Throughout the conference, we were able to track down and interview some of the movers and shakers whose ideas and hopes will shape the new millennium. Prague was a fitting venue for this meeting. Poised as it is at the center of European crisis and promise, it is a metaphor for the transformation of the planet and of human psychology that must take place if we are to provide a sane future for our children. I'm standing in the center of one of Central Europe's most beautiful and mysterious cities. This is Prague, Czechoslovakia, and I'm Terence Mckenna. We're here to meet with some of the world's most outstanding thinkers to discuss science, spirituality, and the mounting global crisis. And it's fitting that we should meet in this, the capital of ancient Bohemia, for Prague and Bohemia have always stood for intellectual innovation, chance-taking, and the life of ideas. In the Jugendstil splendor of one of Prague's most famous concert halls, we encountered Richard Alpert and persuaded him to have lunch with us. Alpert, who now calls himself Ram Dass, is one of the most enduring figures from the American cultural upheaval of the 1960s. Alpert, whose career reaches from Harvard University to the plains of the Punjab, has transformed himself into a spokesman for humanity's ignored and downtrodden. And Ralph Abraham was sitting across the table watching me have this conversation, and when after Steiger left, Ralph leaned over to me and he said, "So you see, Terence, the mushroom is telling you that it can reach out and touch you anywhere." And I thought that was amazing.
Well, anytime you would like to or feel that you'd have the time to guide me through anything at all, I'd be happy to be your...
Excuse me, sir. You are not the famous Terence Mushroom McKenna. That is you, my friend.
It is.
I am aware of.
That's him.
It is.
Oh, how wonderful! Yes, pleased to welcome you on our Bohemian highway here. I especially bring you very good black coffee and espresso. And if you may tell me, who is the attractive elderly gentleman you brought on your side, on your companionship here?
This is Mr. Dass.
Oh, the MS Dass, yes.
No, the Ram Dass.
Oh, the CD-ROM.
The CD-ROM, yes.
CD-ROM Dass.
The LSD
LSD Dass. Yes, the one,
How
yes.
wonderful. Take this, it will be
thank you.
Very Bohemian. And this...
I am so happy to be in your fair country.
Oh, my country, very fair, and happy to have the LSD experience. You know,
What is your name? What is your name?
My name is Waiter.
Waiter, how do you do, Waiter? A pleasure.
Yeah, see you, Waiter. Okay.
See you later.
You don't think there's any... It would needs the external form of the mushroom.
It would never have happened for me. I only argue from my own experience.
Yeah, but you and I were both so thick in crap when it had, that's why we needed it.
Well, but there are a few others out there. We didn't corner the market on being thick in crap.
Yeah, but I'm talking about somebody like a Ramana Maharshi or somebody like that.
Oh, well, these people.
I mean, there are people.
Sure. But the idea is not to come up with something that the best among us can make hay with, but a democratic, something which addresses the species. The thing that seemed to me so important about the psychedelic experience was that it happened to me. I wasn't reading John Chrysostom or Meister Eckhart. Exactly. Of course, those guys.
Right on. It happened to me. It happened to me, yes.
And so I assume that I am a very ordinary person. Therefore, if it happened to me, it could happen to anyone, and that's really
questionable.
something.
There was a set of assumptions there. One, that you're a very ordinary person, and whether the same chemical given to a dozen people would bring about 11 other people like
Similar
this, and I think it would be the outcome would be very different. And that's what I keep getting cast into an evolution of consciousness model about individuals, because there's such marked individual differences as to 3 people come before my guru, one completely goes, and the other 2 get a chapati. And people take psilocybin, and some go like that, and they go like that, and some go like that, and they go like that.
Well, don't you think a good metaphor for it would be sexuality? Apparently there are some people who can kind of take it or leave it, and others of us, it rears its ugly head with great presence. Yet everybody has to
I
come
notice
to
as I get
terms
older,
with
I
it.
move from one of these categories to the other. It leaves so much space in my life. I don't know what to do with my free time.
I hope it never happens to me.
Just clinging. Just clinging.
No, just aspiring to cling. Actually, I live the life of an ascetic. It's my aspirations that are pulling me down. Well, see, the nice thing about this evolutionary argument is that you can sort of make the snake take its tail in its mouth.
Exactly.
Because
It does.
the escape is not into some science fiction future.
No.
It's into an archaic recursion of some sort. We once knew everything we need to know.
Yeah.
So what we are trying to find out is lost knowledge, not new knowledge. And if you direct people back toward 10,000, 20,000 years ago, they see a kind of completion, that an open-ended future is...
It seems to me it's a confusing thing to use time in that way, because it makes the artifacts of that period seem to be valued as opposed to the artifacts of this period. And it seems to me that, I mean, whether you call it not science fiction, but science fiction can also be very compassionate. It can be very historically relevant. It doesn't have to be... it's just using a different set of artifacts to work with. So,
Well, for instance, I see most of what's happened in the 20th century as being unconsciously driven by this fascination with the archaic.
fascination with the archaic.
Yes, I mean...
Wow, that was... of all the things I predicted you'd say, it wasn't that. Tell me what...
Well, for instance, Impressionism deconstructs the hard image of realism and gives you a feeling-toned thing, which was very antithetical to Victorian Edwardian thought. Then Freud and Jung describe different aspects of the unconscious, but to do it, Freud has to talk about repressed, primitive sexual imaginings. Jung talks about folklore, fairy tales, and mythology. Meanwhile, the Dadaists and the Surrealists are saying we have to break up the linear expectations of the bourgeois mind. And then you get at Jackson Pollock and those people who say the image itself has to be thrown out. And then, to my mind, the psychedelic thing in the 60s, based on rock and roll and a boundary-dissolving psychedelic, we, almost by a random walk, are finding our way toward shamanism, tribalism, nomadism.
Go beyond the isms to find out. Tell me what we're really finding.
We're finding a world made out of mind rather than stuff.
Great. Okay, we're finding a world made out of mind. Every time you describe which mind you find, that's just a limiting condition. I mean, if we just find the thing of mind-created stuff, live in that, then what happens?
Well, I mean, there is a transcendental dimension beyond language. It's just hard as hell to talk about it.
But if you live in it and talk from there, then the forms that it will manifest in become just the forms it manifests in. It's nothing more or less than that.
So you mean you download the unspeakable into language and let the chips fall where they may?
Well, they don't fall where they may. They fall in a perfectly harmonious pattern.
Well, that's them falling where they may.
Where they may, where they will.
Yeah. Well, so what I'm hearing from you is you have a very strong sense of the pattern, strong enough that your necessarily limited personal viewpoint doesn't tend to get in the way. You can always push the reset to hope button, and then you hope, almost on principle.
Trungpa said to me, stand halfway between hope and hopelessness. I thought that was very useful.
And is that...
No.
What is it?
It's the ecstasy of total horror and total beauty at the same moment. That's what I feel again and again, Terence. When I'm with somebody dying of AIDS, my God, my heart's breaking. It's horrible. It's a ghastly, the social ostracization, this, that, opportunistic illness and everything. And there's another part of me that's giggling. And I can hardly handle the multifrenia of it all, in the sense of the perfection of it all, and the beauty of the moment, and the horrible shit of it, you know?
Well, it all is spun together. Is that because you feel confident that the self is somehow indestructible, or because you don't even ask that question?
You got to watch the words indestructible, because that has a time dimension. I mean, I think that awareness is that.
But for example, do you think this is the stage upon which all acts are performed, or that we move up and down
stages.
Many levels?
Oh, probably infinite number. Because I just look into two minds and I see two different ones. And those are all on just this one. No, I feel like I have this friend Emmanuel, you know, this spook that has no body. And Emmanuel's two lines to me were, death is absolutely safe, first thing. That's a very profound statement. And the next thing he said, it was like taking out the tight shoe. And then I said to him, Emmanuel, what am I doing here? Who made this error? What am I doing on this plane? He said, you're in school, why don't you try taking the curriculum?
And the curriculum is?
Life.
Any life?
It means the exploration of the clinging of mind within the world of projected form.
So the exploring life.
It's the exploring life with it's purposive in the sense of returning back into the Garden of Eden. It's a return. There is a return metaphor underlying all of it.
And I'm sure you're asked this all the time, so am I. Maybe we give different answers. Do you think that this can be done without psychedelics fast enough to have an impact on the global situation?
I could conceive that it could be. You asked, do I think? I don't really have an opinion whether it will or won't, but I could see it go either way. Well, I mean, like John Seed said to me, it's too late as far as the rainforests are concerned. He says the inertia is too great in the whole system. It's too late. So I said, okay, John. I mean, it was the first time somebody said it to me just like that. He said, it would take a miracle. I said, oh. That threw me back on whatever that was. And then he said, but after all, he said, we came up out of the ocean and came onto land. He said, we have quite a lineage of miracles. I wouldn't underestimate us. That was a nice one.
Well, so my question to you is, are psychedelics a miracle?
Psychedelics are a miracle, yes. They may not be the only miracle.
Are they the miracle we need?
I don't know that. I think they may have already done what they were to do.
Really? That's interesting.
I think
I've never heard anybody
I think
say
what is done is so much more powerful than anybody yet recognizes. See, I see that all this destruction is just the process of transformation. The question is whether they'll keep it together in the process of transformation. And that's why all I'm interested in doing is becoming a person and helping others become a person who, in the process of the dramatic stuff, will keep some equanimity and there's some love and some presence in that process. But that's psychedelics may play a role in that. So you're right. That comes back to your question.
Well, see, my assumption in trying to think about thousands of psychedelic trips rather than just mine, what they seem to do generically is they seem to dissolve boundaries.
Yes.
And the ego is in the business of creating, maintaining, and defending boundaries. So I really see the psychedelics as directly intervening in the core process which is running us over the edge, which is our inability to emotionally connect with the consequences of what we're doing. If for a single moment we could feel what we're doing, we would stop.
I understand.
But we do not.
It's interesting because you take images that all of us know of the girl running down the street naked in Cambodia, or something like that. And we say that wasn't strong enough. It won the Life of the Year award, but it wasn't strong enough. It didn't stop everybody and say, holy shit, what are we doing here? So what would be strong enough to do that? And you say, well, psychedelics, but it's in a one-on-one thing. I mean, we're talking major game players at this moment. Put China into your computer.
How do you deal with that?
I mean, either you're spraying it, or it's water, or it's some other level of consciousness that does it. There is a certain level of trauma that's possible that can soften the ground. Right? Not 3 Mile Island and not Chernobyl, but I don't want to create this with my mind, but I can imagine a certain trauma, like in Marin when they ran out of water. It was interesting. Suddenly all the ego barriers and everything, and neighbors were talking who'd never even met each other.
People were taking showers together.
Yeah, exactly. A whole process was happening. I'm sure marriages, babies were conceived, everything as a result of that trauma, of that denial. So a massive, significant trauma. I just got to tell you one scary image. There's a saint in India who lived up to about 1930, I think, or so. And one of his devotees said to me, one night he was sort of looking off in the distance, and he said, there'll come a time, he said, when you'll walk 5 miles, and he said, you'll sight the light from a fire of another person, and you'll be so happy to know another person exists.
Quite a prediction.
Isn't that quite a prediction? Yeah. It's in there. It's just in there somewhere.
Interesting. Yes, well, I agree. I think that what's going to happen is that...
Gentlemen, everything is fine with the evolution of coffee and consciousness. Both very good with you too.
You have come just at the right time.
Yes,
this is just what I want. How did you know? You tuned into a higher level.
A higher level. Level high, very high, yes. I eat Bohemian mushroom soup today.
We were just talking about that.
Oh, yes. You like Bohemian mushroom soup?
I like mushroom.
Let me sprinkle liberally some water on your chalice, sir.
Oh, please.
That is,
liberally sprinkle his chalice.
Yes.
For sure.
Very good.
I am a chalice, so it's fine if you wish to.
Oh, I know you by your true name. You're Mr. Chalice, sir. Yes. Very good. You also some water in your... No. I was confused. Let me put this here. And have fun with the shaman strudel. Bohemian, very good.
Thank you very much.
You call when things are getting dangerous.
I'll call you.
I'll be right back.
Not to worry.
Good.
Can I ask you a personal question?
You can ask me anything you'd like, Terence.
It's not a personal question to you. It's a personal question from me. How do you like having the projection of special identity constantly laid on you?
It's a sadhana. It's my practice.
That's a good answer. Although you didn't say how you liked it.
I like it to the capacity I have to transpose it. If I can't, sometimes these are going very fast, and to just keep it transposed, then I love it. I love it. It's like a fire. If the minute I start to lose it, it's a fucking drag. It really is. Because, I was in a situation in Miami where all these women with blue eyes and coiffured hair were grabbing at the buttons of my jacket. And I thought, I don't want this. Whatever this life is, I don't want to be part of this. This is, they eat your flesh, finally.
Sure.
But I realize at any time I can walk away from it. And it's my, I'm a free agent.
So do you never get in a situation where you say, gee, I'd like to do X, but Ram Dass would never do that?
My stock and trade, or my coinage, is in sharing just those predicaments publicly. See, I've turned it into, right?
You've managed to, but public confession is the subtlest form of wastrelry.
Of wastrel, yes.
I do it myself. Say, I'm not a good guy. Don't follow me. I'm a bad guy. Then I leave the stage and say, now I can really be a bad guy.
Come up and see my holy pictures. That's one of my lines in my lecture. I'll tell you, I only see the stuff that would disturb me is inside myself. It has nothing to do with out there. Out there is just being what it is, and I'm responding with my own stuff. And if my stuff is my enemy, it's going to get too much for me. And if it isn't, it depends on how much I can consume it, joyfully participate in it, passionately, all of it.
Well, you've sort of achieved a unique synthesis. I mean, you're almost a secular holy man, because I don't care much about what you believe or who you light candles to. Basically, I think I heard you describe yourself once as a kind man. And you've gotten incredible mileage out of that because there are so few.
It's far out.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is...
Well, when you talked about coming back into the boundarylessness, to me, that's the whole quality of compassion. It has that boundarylessness to it. It's that your suffering is my suffering, and your joy is my suffering, and you are me, and here we are. And if you hurt, I'm responding to your hurt, not because I'm a good guy and you're needful, just because this is suffering, and this is the response to suffering. And we're both part of the same thing. And that's the way I like to play it from. That's, to me, it's like riding a wave. It's the joy of just being part of the force of compassion in the universe.
Well, when you look, you mentioned in your talk the other night, since some people think the 90s are going to be a second turn of the spiral, I observed the 60s as a spear-carrying 14-year-old. I was down in the masses. What were the mistakes that are avoidable if there's a second chance?
They're inevitably going to be avoided. The first mistake was idealism. The first mistake, and the mistake was thinking that because you had seen it, you could just go like that and everybody else would see it. And you could just say, it's all love, and then everybody would love. I mean, it was a naivete. It was naivete. It was not working on ourselves deeply enough to be without the clinging of mind that made us try to use it. It was our lurking righteousness that got in our way.
Can you make a revolution, though, without an inner righteousness?
That's the far-out question of where would the action come from? And there's this line in Buddhism that says, out of emptiness arises compassion. And what I experience is that there is a way in which I can sit down in front of a truck or feed a person or go make love or go surf, and there is an appropriateness in every one of those acts. And for me to hear that, I've really got to shut up. And my work is to keep shutting up, to hear which one it is. And if it is a revolution, so be it. Mm-hmm. So be it. You know the story of the monk and the army general, and the army general's disemboweling all the monks? And his reputation has spread far and wide as a cruel, cruel man. And he comes into this village and he says to his adjutant, tell me what's happening. The adjutant said, all the people are frightened, they're bowing down to you. All the monks in the monastery have fled to the hills but one monk. And the general was outraged about this one monk. And he gets up and he goes to the monastery and he pushes open the doors of the monastery and he walks into the courtyard, and there's the monk standing in the middle of the courtyard. And he walks up to him and he says, don't you know who I am? I could take my sword and run it through your belly without blinking an eye. And don't you know who I am? I could have your sword run through my belly without blinking an eye.
That's great.
That's the place from which revolutions can heal, rather than just starting the cycle all over again.
Then this is the place we never found in the 60s. I mean, I've always said it was all well and good.
We reduced it to revolution, and although we had the taste of evolution, we reduced it to revolution.
Well, and the day they came with machine guns, we didn't stand like that monk. Everybody said, well, my God, you could get killed playing this game. And I flew to Laos and India for 3 years.
But already we had produced the they by being so busy being we.
Truth.
Because so that they even noticed we. The fact that they noticed us was because we were busy making statements instead of just being it.
So maybe, I mean, this is just occurring to me, that being in a place like Prague, the real thing we have to learn here is how to make velvet revolutions, non-confrontational.
Exactly right. Exactly right. That's why I admire Havel so much. That's why he's way up there in my, because he's a compassionate leader. He's got wisdom, not just knowledge. He is tuned. There's a quality of his heart that feels present. And he said in this op-ed article I just read, his letter last month.
I've read it too.
And you know, at one point he said we have to allow the naturalness to come back, the personal stuff, the heart stuff. I mean, he was right there with all of the.
Do you see, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't. Let me preface it by saying, do you see anybody who could play that role for the millions of kids in England and the United States who are now asking, where do we go from here?
No.
Is that good or bad?
I guess the situation hasn't demanded the emergence of that being it.
Of those kinds of people.
Because it can't be anybody that comes forward and says, I'm it.
Oh, no. It has to be someone who the people
but the
say,
situation
you're
can
it.
Demand the formation. I mean, you watch, does the man make the time or the time make the man? You know, and you can feel how what took a certain person 20 years, like to ride a bicycle, somebody later on can ride a bicycle like that because the whole culture rides bicycles. There's some, process where the situation emerges where the person has to come forward and they're just forced out. I mean, I go and I look at all the senators that are running for this or that, and I go to breakfast with them and I listen and I tune. And Jerry Brown I hung out with, and I said, you know, he's got interesting ideas, but his heart, my God, he's got work to do. This poor guy, he's suffering so much. And I love him, and I want those ideas out, but I want him to work on himself, you know, and so
but
I don't
do
see
you
anybody
really care in terms of political terms whether Jerry Brown makes himself palatable to an electorate?
I care because I work with the Mayan widows in Guatemala, and I feel like I'm representing them, and our government, our administration's policies are killing them and their children and their husbands. And some way I've got to play my part as a member of a society that is imposing so much suffering on so many people. I can't just walk away and say, oh, I'm helping the nice Mayans. I've also got to realize I'm an American citizen that's hurting the Mayans, and I've got to play both games to change one way and to do the other thing.
So there's a kind of, not to go egghead here, but a kind of coincidentia positorum, because on one level what you're saying is, it's all right, don't worry. And on another level, you clearly are involved in a search for defining your role, where you would do some good.
Optimum judo move.
Optimum judo move. So it isn't enough to just say, the system will take care of itself.
But I am part of the system that is taking care of itself.
So it's a sense of acting
inside
without acting through self.
It's being not identified with the actor and not being identified with the fruits of the action. To me, one of my basic texts is the Bhagavad Gita, and those are the two injunctions. And I really hear those. And they're very weird. How you do an act when you're not identified with being the actor and you're not attached to the fruits. I lead this funny, continuous paradox that suffering stinks and suffering's grace. And I live with both of those all the time.
Well, I think most people do, don't you think?
I think most people have taken a position.
Oh, that suffering is bad, they hate it, they want to keep it away
or that it's grace, then it's, lovely.
Well, and then the great masses of people never really draw the distinction, because for them suffering is like air and water.
It's life. It's life.
It comes with
life.
Burying the many children you bear.
That's why I found in the villages in India less suffering than I found around the middle class in America.
Certainly less whining.
Well, less preoccupation with what they don't have.
Well, they have a philosophy of reincarnation that must sustain them.
There is something else that's feeding them.
Where we have a philosophy of, if you don't get it now, you never will.
Exactly. We threw out in the councils of Nicaea, Trent, and Constantinople just the thing that would have healed, but we did it so that the church could have power over.
Well, I think it was Friedrich Nietzsche who said there was only one Christian and they crucified him.
Yes, exactly. Oh, God, that's so good. It's such a good line. Here comes...
Now, have you been waiting for me? Because I'm the waiter, I need to wait.
We've been looking everywhere for you, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've been waiting for the here and now, but that was somewhere else.
Well,
but can I help you here?
You can help us here, and you can help us
now.
there.
Very good. I'll help you here. I hope you enjoy my conversation.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
do we get a check, or is this all on the house?
No, I am the check. This is Prague, my sir. God is everywhere, but Czechland is here, Okay. I keep one more bottle for you in the refrigerator.
Hold it in
but not in the here and now. In the somewhere else, maybe later. But see you.
Well, I was asking you, what did we do wrong in the 60s?
Yeah, okay.
One thing that has occurred to me, and I certainly felt it with my friends, was we assumed it would go on forever. We had no notion of window of opportunity.
Yes.
We just thought we'd blown the doors off the hinges and they would never be put back on.
Yeah.
To me, the most amazing transformation in my lifetime is not the revolution of the 60s, but the counter-revolution of the 70s, where they managed to put the cuckoo clock back together again, even though we'd kicked it all over
didn't they? That's what I'm... see, you keep thinking there was that opportunity and it closed, and I think it happened then. And all of the 70s and 80s, and all that was this kind of reverberation to this process. And that I'm here, and you're here, and we're both still here, and it's the 90s, and I got a lot of people that, I talk now in Middle America, and I look at my audiences, and they've never taken dope, they've never read Eastern holy books or anything, and I just say the same stuff I was saying in the 60s that I was saying to people with flowers and big pupils, and these people in the middle, they're corseted, nice people, and they're going, and I think, far out, look, it happened. And I was looking the other way.
Well, that's true.
And that's where you're looking for the resonance of a person to come forth that speaks from that consciousness with the assurance of the truth of it.
Right.
That's what I think, why all this business of a Christ figure, I mean, I see how seductive it is, but how we've gotten very cynical because we projected into such a person a purpose. Yes, a purpose. Yeah. Instead of just that light forming out of the needs of the moment to create that light to which... Because I find if I speak from a true enough for a moment, when I can do it, from a true enough place in my heart, it reduces the paranoia, the subtle veils of paranoia in another person. I don't do it to them, it just falls away. Because they're testing, and they don't get from me anything that says like that. And I just watch them like a flower, like that. And I think, boy, I give a lot to just be that instrument. You know, that's worth working for.
Well, that's a great role.
But it's a role for every one of us. That's the role. That's what I said to the ITA. I said, just don't talk about it.
Exemplify
let's do it. Let's be it.
Do
for
it.
God's sakes.
Well, Blake said a wonderful thing. He said, if I can get it right, if the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed.
Right. Exactly.
So all you have to do is say it.
Exactly. When can you say it simply enough? Is it only said in silence simply enough? Or are there words? Or is there music? Or is there what? Or is there...
There's words, there's music, there's silence, there's gesture, because it's always going to exceed one's grasp.
See, my mantra is the Gandhi line, my life is my message.
You said that the other night. That's very good.
Of every level of being.
I think I'm at a little lower level because I'm very aware that I have to struggle to say my life is my message. I would almost rather say my message is my message. Please don't look at my life because I'm a fallible human being and I'm constantly fucking up.
But you see how that weakens your message. You see how that quality means that the message doesn't come from the root, the central. There's a way in which it waffles.
True.
And that's the thing. I really can't. Once I saw the possibility of that, I said, why waffle? What is worth holding on to that's worth waffling about?
Well, I once said to Leo Zeff, I'm sure you knew Leo, I said to him in a meeting, I said, Leo, you're finished, you're completed, you're baked. Me, I'm half-baked. And I hope that the rest of my life will finish the baking process.
You're not half-baked. That's what's interesting. I mean, when you and I talk, you and I hear each other perfectly. Truth. And so where are we hearing each other from? I mean, then we each play our game the way we play our game, and you can play your game saying I'm half-baked. That's your strategy if you choose.
It's a mercurial strategy.
Yes, I understand it as such.
Here's to Mercurius. You have somehow been able to survive the gauntlet of American media in a way that your colleagues and comrade in arms didn't seem to. They either had to step away from their leader role or they transmuted it into some lesser thing. So now Allen Ginsberg is poet laureate, Tim Leary is, keeps the club scene in Los Angeles interesting. Yes. But you, in a sense, never backed down, never retooled. You were also not first among equals back in the original thing. But when all is said and done,
I was always the second. In a way, it's like birds. If you stay just behind the lead bird, you don't have to do much. You're just kind of riding along on the.
Well, and Ralph tells me to be third is the real good position. It's like being the young prince. You won't ever be king.
It was only until about 5 years ago. In the past 5 years, they've stopped introducing me as Tim Leary's partner.
Right.
And which, I think that was great. I see him as one of my, first teachers, great teachers. And, but I don't have the fun for me. It says, I have no model of myself. I don't know who I am. I don't know whether I'm an anachronism from the 60s or I'm just about to happen.
A prophet to be.
Yes, I have no idea. And I don't care. That's what I saw. Because either of them, all the things you get in either way are a drag and they're beautiful, equally.
No, well, I think you're a prophet to be. I think we all are. That,
we all are, yes.
As Bilbo Baggins once said, the greatest adventure still lies ahead. I believe that. I'll believe that when they lower my box.
I do too. Exactly.
Good.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for coming by. I'm sure you had many, many demands on you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Good.
I was afraid of you up until now. Now I'm delighted to be with you.
No, don't be afraid of me. The people who are afraid of me don't know me, or they know me better than you ever will. Angela Sarian is an anthropologist and workshop leader from California who brings the unique perspective of her Basque ancestors to the formulation of a new discipline which I would call neo-shamanic anthropology. So there you have it, as the king said to Mozart.
Yes. Yes, as the caterpillar on top of the mushroom said, "Who are you?"
Well, so I looked over your newsletter. And it looks like sort of a neo-shamanism is the category that you are now defining in your public talks. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of that, but mostly universals, what we all have in common, finding those basic roots, which then take us back to indigenous cultures. Archetypes. Especially the archetype of the warrior and the healer and the teacher and the visionary. Those are the four that the shamanic or indigenous cultures really focus upon.
Well, so you're genuinely in the mainstream of the archaic revival.
Never thought about it that way, Terence.
Well, actually, I'm sort of subliminally plugging one of my books, which is called The Archaic Revival. But the notion is that what this whole cultural thrust of the 20th century, and especially the last 30 years, will ultimately be understood to be about, is a return to Aboriginal models.
Yes.
And that means especially shamanism, and to my mind, especially psychedelic shamanism.
Yes.
But the Renaissance went through a rebirth of classicism, probably without ever really articulating that that's what was happening. But I think this shamanic or Aboriginal ecological feminine partnership impulse is now pretty explicit. So that's what I meant.
Yeah. Well, I think that I love the title, like Archaic Revival, because at the same time what's coming up is everyone talking about a new world order. Right. And yet in order to understand what constitutes a new world order, we need to take a look at what the current world order is. And so we really have essentially four worlds. We have the industrialized first world, and we have the socialist bloc, which would be the second world, and we have the third world countries, which are really the developing countries like Brazil. But the fourth world is really the Aboriginal indigenous cultures that are within cultures but don't have the same kind of rights. And the first three worlds say that the land belongs to the people. But the fourth world says that the people belong to the land. And so that people belonging to the land is really it's your archaic revival, but it's getting back to nature and owning those roots brings up that revival, which is the shift that we're going to need to make in order to do the new world order, is to get the people back to the land.
Well, it's too bad that there's no place in the world where that Aboriginal position is in a governing position.
Starting for the first time in the last 3 years is the establishment of the World Indigenous Council. And this summer in July is the first time that there will actually be a vote to have a seat on the United Nations where there will be representatives from each of the world indigenous peoples. And so I'm real hopeful
Really?
about that.
You mean every Amazonian tribe could potentially have a
Yes.
delegate in the UN?
Yes. Or that they themselves could have a council and vote who would be their best representatives as a bioregional.
Well, you know, there's some phrase in Latin, I can't remember what it is, but it means that he who does not expand his borders will have his land taken by somebody else.
Yes.
And this was the theory that drove colonization in South America. All of these countries like Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela actually encroach on a vast Aboriginal core of that continent, which should be self-governing.
Yeah.
And were it self-governing, it would be a tremendous... Huge force.
Yeah. It's amazing that I really think that for the last 20 years there's been this whole east-west bridging, but we're really starting in the last 5 years to this north-south kind of bridging, and I really feel that that the Latin American countries, which there are 12, plus the indigenous force countries, that the northern force would be Europe, Russia, Canada, but the whole southern force is like Africa, Asia, and the Latin American countries. And so that whole force and those two forces really coming
So
together.
even though you're a spiritual teacher, you talk global politics
I
like a
do.
State Department second string.
I do. Well, I was thinking about the grandparents of the planet being the old Asian cultures and all the Pacific Rim, and then the exciting thing that's happening in Europe for the first time in history, that 11 countries are coming together to form a European coalition that it puts the child of the planet, which is like America or the United States, which is so based on a hero myth or a heroine myth and fierce independence, that for the call in the next 50 years is for Americans to learn about community, which indigenous societies and the grandparents of the planet, the old Asian cultures, and now the parents of the planet, really modeling teamwork and collaboration and community, is that America is going to need to really learn about collaboration and community and cooperation. And in order to do that, then there's going to need to be going back to what would be the archaic revival, or that beginning to shift so that there can be a new world order where that fourth world is addressed.
Well, don't you think sort of what's happening is that people have a very strong local sense of place, loyalty,
That's true.
and then they are forming a planetary loyalty, but in a way all the levels in between are dissolving, so
Yes.
people don't think of themselves as Americans, they think of themselves as Northern Californians and Earthlings, sort of like that.
Yeah.
But in a way, federal Europe, which is no longer a sure thing, you know, because of these recent developments, it goes against that. I sort of think maybe McLuhan was right, and that there is going to be a kind of electronic feudalization where many more small states will emerge, and the raison d'etre for the nation state appears to be slowly disappearing. And the states, I think the crisis that came to Marxism is coming now for the republicrat oligarchy in America.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a terrific shift of power that's going on, that out of maybe the hierarchical types of power to people power, and I see two major forces contributing to that, which is one, the computer or the electronic, because it's people-based, individual-based, bringing the power back to the individual, and also free enterprise rather than capitalism or communism. There's that middle road coming in. So I think that when we take a look cross-culturally at the three kinds of power, or the power of presence, or the power of communication, or the power of position, the willingness to take a stand, is that it's going to be very important to see how those shifts of power really are going back to empowerment of the people.
So what are you looking toward in the future, personally and globally?
I've been doing a lot with taking a look at what's found that's similar in all art globally, because I feel that what humanity consistently creates in art is really reinforcing deep spiritual processes. And so what I've found is that there are 5 shapes that are found consistently in all art globally. And one is the circle, and the other is the cross, like the plus sign, the equidistant cross, and the triangle, and the square, and the spiral. And and you can see them all here in Prague, everywhere you look. I mean, and all the decor are those shapes repeated over and over and over again. So I began to look cross-culturally to see if cultures attributed the same meaning to those shapes, and found that 92% of all the cultures attribute the same meaning to the circle, which is the process of individuation, or to the cross, relatedness, and interconnection and interface, and the square, stability and foundation setting, and
So does this imply a genetic syntax of form or something like that?
I think that it's part of the archaic revival, in that there would be a deeply cellular imprinting of some kind.
Well, that's what I mean by genetic.
Yeah, I really do. Or the triangle being the visionary or searching, seeking, questing process, or the planning, dreaming process, and the spiral being the need for variety, or the need for change, or growth and evolution. So it's been really wonderful. It's part of a new book that's coming out called Signs of Life, and showing how those images come up in all of the continents and are also found in literature, poetry, and put all that together in one place.
So do you spend much time thinking about the future?
I do.
What's your take on it?
I think that it's exciting for me to think that we're being called in the next 50 years to our own creative fire, that we all have salvation myths and we all have doomsday myths, but there's a whole body of myths in mythology that have been totally overlooked that I think we're being called to, which are creation myths. And what are the creation myths but stories about how to build new worlds internally and externally? And I think that for 2,000 years we've done the polarity dance, and we're moving into a both-and world rather than an either-or world. And I'm excited about the future, that if we can really move into the wisdom of the plant kingdom, and if we can move into the deep wisdom of nature as a mirror of our own nature, that and remember our creative fire, I think it will be a wonderful time in history. I'm so glad I was born at the time I was born, to be a part of this evolutionary renaissance.
How do you see it happening? I mean, do you see a breakthrough with technology, or an abandonment of technology? Do you see pharmacological engineering? Do you see new religions? Do you see... In other words, it's easy to hope, but very hard to get the details in focus.
Yeah. I think that what I see is that there'll be both the bridging of the natural and the technological.
So a more cellular technology, a more organic infrastructure.
For sure. And I think that computers are here to teach us about those organic structures. I think that we're learning different kinds of systems to really see what are the inherent systems within nature and within our own nature.
So to the degree that we can mirror nature, we can re-spiritualize, re-humanize technology and interpersonal relations.
Which will be wonderful.
I come right down the line on that.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds, and to me, psychedelics are just simply the best catalyst, but anything which works should be pushed to the limit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, I was just thinking that somehow we've got to think about possibilities. I was thinking about in the Rosicrucian era, which is very close here to Prague, is that they would often say you can count the seeds in an apple, but you can't count the apples in a seed. And I think we're moving in that era where we really, think of the possibilities and the seeds that we have been planting, or the fact that computers are teaching us about instant feedback or instant response and acknowledgement, and that the power of acknowledgement and feedback to allow organisms to grow. And that's why children are, in many ways, know that instinctively, that they're mesmerized by, that they can get a yes or no or go back or fatal error or whatever it might be.
Well, it's a kind of explicit hardwiring of our own unconscious.
Yeah.
No more do we create cultural artifacts that are simply our furniture, but now our thoughts, our values are embodied in this stuff. Yeah, it's very exciting. It's very exciting.
Yeah,
it's
it really
very
is.
Exciting. I envision a future world where people are nomadic, aboriginal, physically perfect, living basically naked. But if you were inside one of these people's minds, you would see that when they close their eyes, there are menus hanging in space. That the culture has been shrunk down to something rather like a contact lens, which is in the forefront of their eyelid, and they look into culture by closing their eyes. And when they open their eyes, nature in her radiance is all around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's great talking to you. Behind me is the skyline of modern Prague. In the 16th century, this city became an alchemical center and figured in one of the most interesting episodes in the evolution of European thought. Rudolf II ruled from here in a court of great extravagance, And upon the death of the old emperor, the princes of the Northern League met to choose from among themselves a successor. Their choice was Frederick the Elector Palatine, who held court at Heidelberg. Frederick was all that a young prince of the Northern League could hope to be, surrounded by brilliant courtiers, married to a daughter of the King of England. He represented the alchemical hopes of Catholic Europe. And in the fall of 1619, having been recently chosen emperor, he moved his court from Heidelberg to Prague, bringing with him some of the most brilliant occult minds of the era, Johannes Andrei, Count Michael Meyer, the alchemical printer Theodor de Bry. But the reign of the Winter King and Queen, as this incident is called, was not to last. But the alchemical fantasies of Frederick the Elector Palatine of Bohemia and his queen were destined to fail. For by the early spring of 1620, a local bishop had raised an army and had been joined by Habsburg troops who laid siege to Prague. And that siege, after a number of weeks, succeeded. Among those taking part in the siege was a young French soldier who had been wenching and traveling across Europe in the style of the times, René Descartes, destined to be the founder of modern scientific materialism. I like to think that perhaps Descartes actually encountered his bête noire, Michael Meyer, Prince of Alchemists, in the confused situation that prevailed when Prague fell. For Meyer was lost in the siege of Prague, never to be heard from again. It's instances like this in the history of European thought that have inspired a group of American thinkers to form the Bohemian Institute of Prague, a think tank, theater group, and video production center to be established here in Prague and to celebrate the occult and spiritual heritage of this great city, a city which, had its alchemical visions been completed, modernity would have been a far different affair. Alchemy is an ancient art, one of the magical arts associated with dyeing and the gilding of metals, and tracing its origins back to ancient Egypt. But its modern culmination is here in the city of Prague, where in the 16th century, under the patronage of the Emperor Rudolf, the great alchemists of Europe gathered and pursued their art. Including Kepler. Alchemy is more than a technique for the conversion of base metals into gold. It is the culminating metaphor in the search for a union of spirit and matter. And whether or not this union was ever achieved is as mysterious as much of the rest of this ancient city. But whatever the success of the alchemists, they provide us with a metaphor for spiritual transformation that is extraordinarily applicable in the modern era. It was for this reason that the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung made alchemical motifs as important a part of his theory of the unconscious as the contents of dreams or folklore. You see, before modern science, the separation between observer and observed was more naively understood than in our own world. And the alchemist, staring into the swirling content of his retorts and his alembics, was seeing in his own imagination not the processes of natural chemistry, but an intermingling of psychological processes and material processes in a domain of epistemic confusion that we have grown distant from. Nevertheless, the legacy of our own science is one of pollution of the earth, toxification of the oceans. Something has been lost from the Western vision of nature by the exclusion of the notion of spirit. And it's fitting that in an effort to recapture that lost something, we return to Prague the center of European occult thinking and a beacon to any future thinking on these matters. Well, Ken, you've certainly spent a number of years on these questions. I'm talking with Dr. Kenneth Ring. We're in the Prague Botanical Gardens. Dr. Ring is the author of the Omega Project and is the world's leading expert on the near-death experience. Ken, I know recently you've been interested in UFOs. How did you get from UFOs or from near-death experiences to UFOs? That seems quite a leap.
Well, on one perhaps mistaken day, I picked up a copy of Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, came out some years ago. And though I had no interest in fact, an aversion to UFO studies, I found that some of the effects that he was talking about of those experiences seemed very reminiscent of those that followed NDEs. And so I wanted to explore the connection.
Why do you think that these abduction phenomena never happen to what I would call smart people? In other words, it's always some poor soul who lives in a trailer park who has this
No, I don't
happen.
think so. I think that there are people who have these experiences that come from a pretty wide swath of the social register, up and down. What I found in my studies is that actually the people who are prone to these experiences are folks with a troubled background. They often report traumatic childhoods. They report sexual abuse, stressful childhoods. They're people who, even as children, seem to be susceptible not to fantasy, but to alternate realities. Not everybody is equally likely to have this kind of experience. I don't think these folks are pathological or come from some particular social stratum, but they have particular kinds of psychological characteristics that predispose them to have these kinds of experiences.
How do you relate this phenomenon to your own field of expertise, which is the near-death experience?
What I found is if you look at the phenomena themselves, they seem extremely different in terms of their feature surfaces. What you look at the near-death experience, it's a very blissful experience, it's very beautiful, people have very many positive things to say about it. You look at the abduction experience, people are traumatized by it, deeply frightened, disturbed by it. They seem at antipodes, but if you look at the structure of these experiences, the structure is the same. They have the structure of shamanic journeys, of initiations. You're taken from the ordinary world, you're taken to another world, you learn things, you are transformed in that world, and you bring back those transformations with you. What I found was that the same kind of background that's typical for people that report UFO encounters, not limited to, but including abductions, is exactly the same kind of profile that you find for people that have had NDEs, near-death experiences. Same kind of person is prone to them. So I talk about an encounter-prone personality who's susceptible or vulnerable to these kinds of experiences more than the average person. But the key thing that relates these two phenomena, and perhaps others like them, are the transformations that tend to take place in the lives of people afterward. People with both kinds of experiences say afterward they are more appreciative of life, more appreciative of nature, they have a deeper feeling of self-worth, they are more compassionate individuals, or less materialistic. They're more spiritual and not necessarily more religious. In fact, they may be less religious, but they're more spiritual. They're more psychic. They're more intuitive. What seems to be the outcome of these experiences is however different the experiences themselves may be in their content, the effect is the same. You go through an ordeal of either nearly dying or the shock of a UFO encounter, and you're changed by that experience. Like Nietzsche said, that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. These people are stronger spiritually. They seem to function at higher levels of intuitive understanding, of psychic awareness. It's an expanding experience for both.
Well, it's interesting that the personality profile is the same, but in one case the reaction is positive, the other negative. Do people have near-death experiences without coming near to death?
Sure, there are lots of ways, and I think the near-death experience is misleading because it implies there's something unique that happens at the point of physical death or when people enter clinical death, and that's not true. There are many different pathways that lead to essentially the same experiences without having to throw yourself under the tires of the nearest oncoming truck. Many different ways to get into this kind of experience.
So relate it a little bit to the psychedelic experience.
I'd be happy to. I think that I've talked with a lot of people, I'm sure you've talked to many more, who have had high-dose LSD sessions or other kinds of psychedelic sessions who have told me, in effect, well, I never came close to death, but I know exactly what you mean when you talk about a near-death experience because I've had the same thing. The out-of-body experience, the feeling of moving into a beautiful, radiant, illuminated space, the sense of being flooded with total universal knowledge, of being transformed in the instant and bringing that transformation back. To me, it's like the light or spiritual reality or whatever this thing may be called is available all the time. There are just different access routes to it. The psychedelic is clearly one aspect, one route that leads to that destination. The near-death experience is another. People following a spiritual path and deeply committed to it could have the same kind of revelation, the same kinds of insights. So I think that, it's a question of equifinality, many different pathways leading to the same destination and the same transformative effects. That's what I think is important about those experiences.
Well, now we've had psychedelic experiences and near-death experiences presumably for millennia. Is this abduction thing new, or are we just getting the old stuff repackaged in a funny way?
Well, I think that it's related to things that have always happened to humankind. Interaction with the invisible world of spirits. Your phrase, I think, was sylphs of the air, the elementals, the fairies. Folklore, I think, is certainly related to this particular phenomenon. However, even among folklorists like Eddie Bullard, for example, who's the one who's looked into this most closely from the standpoint of the UFO abduction phenomenon, there seem to be aspects of this experience that make it unique unto itself, that make it similar to the folkloric experiences of former times, and yet it's in a kind of technological gloss. I think maybe because the alien is kind of the mythic archetype of our time, it's not fashionable to see angels and spirits and demons anymore, but the myth of the extraterrestrial is everywhere you look. And so I think in a way this particular kind of archetype has been clothed in the imagery and the kind of space-age technology and talk and so on that's characteristic of our own time. So I think there's something unique to it and something that relates to, the folkloric experiences of former times too. Because contact between the invisible world and the physical world, that's probably as old as man is old.
But you're essentially, it sounds as though you're fundamentally a psychologist in that you don't take this at face value.
No, I don't take these as literal experiences of an incursion into physical space-time reality of little beings from other places that have come to do nasty things to people. That, oddly enough, it seems odd to me, seems to be the dominant view of American ufologists. I'm not a ufologist, as you say, I'm a psychologist. In Europe, I think the interpretation is quite different. I don't take these experiences literal, but I take them as real within an alternate reality, within what Henri Corbin calls an imaginal realm. They're real enough. People, for example, people who have near-death experiences will say things like, this experience was more real to me than you and I sitting here talking about it is real. It's more real than life itself. There is a reality to these experiences, but I think it's a profound mistake to think it's the same thing as space-time ordinary sensory world reality.
So what you're saying is that these are symbolic constructs.
Yes. There's a symbolic aspect to them. And I think the important thing, I think there are two attitudes toward the UFO question. It's a mystery, but there are two types of mysteries. There are mysteries like in detective stories that beg for some kind of solution, and you only feel satisfaction when the solution at the end is revealed and all the reasons given. Then there are mysteries that are meant to be explored, to be savors. Yes, true mysteries. And these mysteries beg for exploration, not for explanation, if I can put it that way. And the UFO, seems to me, the UFO phenomenon is the second category of mystery. That's why I personally and perhaps temperamentally am opposed to the idea of trying to package it as though it were something as simple as other beings, however amazing that would be in itself, other beings coming from other places in the galaxy to invade or to have some contact with human affairs. I think the mystery is likely to be much more profound than that. And another thing, if I may say, that I think hooks together the near-death experience with the UFO experience, whatever its basis may be, is when people come out of these experiences and have worked it through, they come to have a worldview that is very similar to one another and is very similar to what's being talked about all the time at this conference, and that's an ecological worldview. The heightening of ecological sensitivity, the increase of concern with the welfare of the planet is one thing that unites these two people, even though they have these very disparate experiences. What they say about what they've learned from these experiences, what the meaning of these experiences for them is, that the fate of the Earth is in our hands and we better wake up to do something about it very quick. So I see these experiences perhaps being orchestrated by, I think this is similar to your view, perhaps a planetary mind, an overmind, a mind at large, which is in some sense the expression of our deepest yearnings and perhaps our deepest fears that are feeding back these kinds of experiences in the form of kind of archetypal experiences, archetypal images, so as to impress people who might not otherwise be impressed to take the kind of action necessary to correct the direction in which the Earth is heading.
So it's a kind of confoundment. Its purpose is to be inexplicable.
Exactly. That's exactly how I conclude my book. I say the point of these experiences is to be baffled by them, almost as though they're a kind of a koan that we're not meant to solve, but we're meant to kind of chew over until our rational mind cracks and we begin to think in entirely new ways and hopefully act in entirely new ways.
So it's a way of keeping us from closure.
Exactly. It's kind of a sort of a deconstruction phenomenon, you could even say.
It's saying to us the world is not so simple as you might choose to suppose.
Exactly so.
We're going to be talking with Rupert Sheldrake, one of Britain's most controversial natural scientists. Sheldrake is the proponent of a theory called morphic resonance. He believes that the presence of the past actually impinges on processes in the present and the future. In other words, our world is as it is because of how it once was. This is not a genetic theory, not a theory of natural selection, but a field theory which holds that actions and situations in the past are able, through the mere act of having happened, to shape future and present events. Rupert, this immense Baroque building is the Museum of Natural History in Prague, and I wanted to bring you here because I thought it would be an appropriate place to discuss your ideas, because after all, a museum is a kind of archive of morphology.
Exactly. With these stuffed animals and skeletons are like photographs, snapshots of forms frozen. But of course each animal behaves and moves, each animal develops as an embryo to its adult form, and each one evolves. So it's triply dynamic. We have to reconstruct that in our minds. But the whole thing really is a reflection, I think, of the memory behind each species. Each species is the repository of an entire process of memory.
Well, now this is the part of your thinking which goes well beyond orthodox theoretical biology. Say a bit more about that.
Well, the orthodox view is that all these amazing forms and all the behavior and instincts that the animals expressed were all coded in the chemical genes.
So a materialist theory.
That's a materialist theory. I think it goes far beyond that and involves a memory of instincts, a memory of behavior, a memory of form.
That is not materially based.
Not materially based. A collective memory on which each species draws.
So here we are in the Hall of Paleontology. This is sort of the archive of all these morphogenetic forms that have persisted through time. Can you say how your notions go beyond Darwinian and Mendelian genetics and evolutionary theory?
Well, I agree with the conventional theory that there are genes, they're important in inheritance. They give each organism the chemicals it needs. But as well as that, you see, there's the morphic fields, the organizing fields of these forms. And the forms, like we see in these shapes here, are all determined by the fields. They determine the way organisms develop. These are all extinct types. And I would say that the memory is not only inherent in the species while they're alive, even after they're dead, even after they're extinct, the world is still filled with, as it were, the ghosts of extinct species, memories of species that no longer exist. So the memories of evolution are cumulative, they build up, and sometimes we see in the course of evolution extinct forms of shellfish, for example, come back again after 10, 20 million years. These are called evolutionary iterations, evolutionary repeats, and they're explained in terms of atavism, the recapturing of ancient memories.
But in a sense, you're saying that after the species is extinct, but the fossil form lives on, then it is somehow a catalyst to this recursion of form.
There's an entire memory built into nature. The world is, as it were, haunted by the ghosts of extinct species. Each species is influenced by all the past members of its species, but behind that, all the forms that have gone before, which is why in the course of embryonic development we see echoes of the embryonic forms of remote ancestors, the way that we developed through a fish-like stage with gill slits and so on.
But in a case like that, then how is it possible for new form to emerge at all?
Well, this is where novelty comes in. Well, no one can account for novelty except perhaps yourself. To say that it's blind chance, as the conventional view, tells us very little, almost nothing. It's really just simply saying novelty is unintelligible. There are different ways of thinking of it. The founders of paleontology, like Cuvier, the great fossil pioneers, the pioneers of this kind of museum, had thought that they were all reflections of Platonic archetypal forms, timeless forms. That wouldn't really explain creativity. It would simply say there were pre-existing forms that were merely manifested. Other people would think of creativity as going on as evolution proceeds. So a bird like this didn't exist at one time, then usually by a sudden jump it would appear, and then through repetition would become increasingly habitual, then become extinct, and the potential habits, the memory would persist in nature, although it wouldn't be expressed.
Well, tell me this. Do you think that a person holding this point of view has a license for more optimism than people who are trying to operate in the ordinary scientific paradigm? In other words, how does this idea reflect back into the dilemma of the human world here at the brink of the third millennium?
Well, several ways. Firstly, this theory leaves the nature of creativity open. It may be blind chance, but it could be anything else as well. There could be a directing intelligence. All we know is that new things appear. We don't know how they appear. Secondly, it tells us that habit is a very important principle in nature, and it makes us aware of the importance of our own habits, personal and cultural. But thirdly, the theory tells us that when new things happen, by morphic resonance they can spread around the world much more quickly than they might otherwise be able to. And this could be a ground for optimism. It means that change can happen faster than we might otherwise believe. And change, fast change, seems to be very necessary if we're to survive.
So what you're saying is we don't have to rely on mechanisms like cultural diffusion or direct communication. These new concepts, new paradigms are in the air, as it were.
Yes, and of course we all know about modern telecommunications, modern mass media. But morphic resonance means that new attitudes, new patterns of behavior can spread much quicker than one might otherwise have thought.
Well, tell me this then. How is the theory of morphic resonance doing? Is it behaving according to its own predicted trajectory, or is it meeting unexpected resistance?
It's meeting expected resistance.
I see.
But the idea certainly seems to be catching on. I mean, there's a sense in which this idea of a kind of habit appeals to people. You know, people, it makes sense, the idea of a collective memory. The idea that what we learn is like a kind of remembering of what others have learned is intuitively plausible to me and to many other people. And I would say certainly the idea is getting easier to explain than it was when I first thought of it.
Well, I've heard it said that it very elegantly and neatly solves problems which are insoluble by any other means in biology. Could you just name a couple of these areas where it makes clarity out of chaos?
Well, there are many. One is the development of form in embryos, the way that a bird like this could grow from an egg. And how any organism develops from an egg is a great mystery. And the idea of morphogenetic fields, form-shaping fields, is the basis of the whole theory. That's what I started from. And so it helps to explain the problem of form. It helps to explain the inheritance of instincts as well, how new patterns of behavior develop and spread. So these are two of the areas that it helps.
So is it the non-material presupposition that makes it so difficult for orthodox science to accept this into its canon?
Yes, it's the idea of a kind of non-material memory on which each member of the species draws and in turn to which it contributes. It's very like Jung's idea of the collective unconscious. This is an idea that's in one form familiar to people already. But because modern science is steeped in a kind of materialistic way of thinking, the idea that everything has to involve material and material transfer is very important for a lot of scientists. Of course, in the light of modern physics, it's a very old-fashioned idea. To get a television program from the transmitting station to the receiving set doesn't involve couriers carrying cans of videotape. It goes through as vibrations through a field. And I think that radio and television have broken us out in our everyday thinking from the 19th century materialistic paradigm, because fields and vibratory connections through fields are now the stuff of everyday life. And the idea that all forms of information transfer have to involve material is no longer tenable. But many people's scientific thinking, including that of many scientists, is still locked into a kind of 19th century materialism.
Well, probably because the theory of genetics has been so successful, and it is a theory of material particles. It sounds as though biology has been dragging its feet somewhat behind physics in terms of its acceptance of field theory.
Well, modern neo-Darwinian theory is based on the discoveries of geneticists in the 1910s and following Mendel in the 1850s and 60s. And it's based on old-style atomistic particulate theory. The whole basic way of thinking was formed long before quantum theory came into being. It takes almost no account of modern developments in physics. It takes almost no account of modern cosmology, the idea that the laws of nature could evolve along with the cosmos. It's locked into an earlier form of classical physics. And I think that what I'm suggesting is much more in accordance with the modern spirit of physics, whereas most of biology is still an attempt to reduce the phenomena of life to high school physics, which is essentially classical physics of the 19th century type.
Well, essentially, you're attempting to go beyond reductionism,
yes,
it sounds.
I think so.
And what are your expectations for success? In other words, are there experimental strategies which are supporting this point of view, or is it largely theory? Where do you stand with it?
Well, experiments are going on in the realm of morphic resonance, principally in the realm of behavior at the moment, animal behavior, human behavior. But the theory applies to crystals as well as to plants and animals. And chemical tests are some of the most potentially exciting. I'm doing some work on crystal forms and crystal phenomena. The main experiments there in the human realm, so far they've been very encouraging. They suggest that people can learn more quickly what others have already learned. And that's also the area where the theory could be most immediately applied, for example, in education.
Well, the theory seems to imply that its own correctness depends largely on its being heard and repeated.
Well, the theory implies that the more it's heard and repeated, the easier it will be for people to get to grasp the theory, to understand it. Yes, that's true.
And so it seems to be.
So it seems to be.
We're in Prague's Museum of Natural History, talking with Jill Peirce of London, England. Jill is an expert in Mongolian overtonal chanting. So, Jill, tell me something about your work with sound.
Well, I'm trying to, I like to think that to re-enchant means to make magical through chanting. And what has happened to our society is we've become disenchanted, which literally means that we've stopped chanting. And this has been a gradual process in what we call the developed Western society. The more developed our society, the less we chant and sing. And chanting is a very powerful way of healing and a way of tuning ourselves, with our environment, with our family, with the sacred place, with the sacred time, keeping us in tune with all our environment and with God. And we stopped doing that. We started to stop doing that when we stopped believing in God. When we started measuring things in the 17th century, and we found that it felt better, and we felt we had more control by measuring than we did by chanting and by praising God, by petitioning God, and by participating with God, which are the three ways that we've always made a reciprocal relationship with he or she who seemed to be in control of our life and destiny. And when we stopped doing that, because we felt that counting gave us a greater sense of control of our environment and meant that we ourselves had a greater chance of survival.
But why this particular Central Asian shamanic approach to it?
Well, what's happened now is that what we found is that science, since the 17th century, the development of science, the direction of science, has quite far from giving us the control that we thought it was. It's led us in an unprecedented way to be, and only through science, to be less in control of our environment than ever anybody has ever been. We have never been in such a dangerous situation. We have never been so vulnerable, and this is entirely because of science. And so all the control that we thought we were gaining has actually turned out to be quite the reverse. And so we are completely out of control. And so we again have to find out, how do we do it? If science has failed, what other ways may succeed? What other ways can we again create a reciprocal relationship with this great and powerful force? And so we have to look at the old traditions, and do we go back to being good Christians, good Hindus, good Muslims, or good Jews, or do we try and, if we're a Hindu, become a Muslim, if we're a Buddhist, become a Christian, if we're a Christian, or do we try and reinvent it all? Or the problem really is, what song do we sing? And so what I've tried to do is to find a way of chanting which is deeply cultural. It comes from Central Asia, and in particular Mongolia. But what I think is so extraordinary about this way of chanting is that it deals with sound, with the harmonics of sound, which is a way not of culturally dividing the octave, which is what all other forms of music have as their central core, which is that if you divide the octave, this is a cultural affair. How you do it differs whether you're Indian or whether you're Western. But what this is based on the harmonic series, which is simply a way of making our own geometry audible. It's a way of allowing us to hear in a sonorous way our own structure. And this is a profound recognition. It's a profound remembering, because we are hearing what we are.
So it's a kind of organic music, or organic sound.
Absolutely. It's the most organic sound, because we're making audible our biology.
Well, I brought you here to this wonderful Baroque room because I was hoping that perhaps you would honor us with an example of this, since I'm sure it's easier to hear than to describe.
Yes.
Do you think you're up for that?
Yes.
Okay, my dear. Please have a go at it. David White, a transplanted Yorkshireman, lives in Washington State, USA. He is a published poet and a performer of his own poetry and the poetry of others. His work reflects a special sensitivity to the ecological crisis and the problem of a burgeoning planetary population. You mentioned this concept, the ecological imagination.
Yes.
So obviously this is sort of the distillate for you of
Yes.
some of your thinking.
Yes.
So say something about it. What is it exactly?
Well, it's an imagination where the image itself has many different realities constellated within it. It isn't an image that you're trying to impose on the world. It's an image that's received after you've remained quiet and you're willing to pay attention to the miracle of creation as it is. Now, that miracle may take the form of despair and alienation, as it has over the last 60 years, but you pay attention to it. You know, we live in a monocultural society where you plant wheat in one field and you spray down on either side so you get one crop. And the soil, which comes from the same root as the word soul, suffers as a result. You know, in the eastern Palouse of Washington State, they've lost 25 to 50 feet of topsoil, you know, through intensive mining, almost mining agriculture. You know, here we are in the Botanic Gardens in Prague, where plants have been brought from all over the world. In some ways, it's a wish by humanity to recreate the beauty and imagination of the rainforest, or of an ecology that where things fit together exquisitely. Mm-hmm. And we have this inside us. We have this patterning, this understanding that the world fits together absolutely exquisitely, and we have a possibility of fitting together too. So the poet remains silent, looks out at the world, receives all the images that comes in, and tries to say the one word that represents the whole ecology of everything that is received, and hopefully will give birth to that world in the word, in the line.
This suggests somehow that the word is made flesh. Or in your metaphor, the flesh is made word.
Yes. Yes, or the word is made ecology.
The word is made ecology. Well, so this is an aesthetic of nature, almost Emersonian in its scope. This is a far cry from futurism or the glorification of the technological that a lot of 20th century poetics has been about.
Yes.
Do you see yourself as a part of a conservative impulse in poetry or a reforming impulse? How does that work?
No, I don't see it as being conservative. It may be looked at that way from the areas of art which, say, Andy Warhol inhabited, where the whole emphasis was on the latest wave that was breaking on the shore.
Fashion.
Yes, fashion, and the whole sea that was behind each wave as it came upon the shore was ignored. And so I think what there is now is a resting back, a swimming out, a diving down into that sea to re-establish our eldership. I think much of what's happening in the 20th century is a re-establishment of eldership. I mean, here we are in Prague. Prague has been asleep almost like Rip Van Winkle for the last, 40 years.
Anyway, 40 years, possibly longer.
And it's awaking again, and there's so much awaking in the world today. And I think poetry has always been the art where you remind people of what life is about and what is essential to it, and what's, as Pericles said, what is sweet and what is terrible about life, that you have to know both those things. And the poet ignores neither. So hopefully it's not the kind of conservatism where you're trying to go back to some Edenic, Rousseauistic past where everyone can gather under one oak tree and discuss the problems of the village. That's never going to happen. But the poet he does not hide, or she does not hide the beauty of life, and does not hide the alienation. You know, this century we've had tremendous emphasis on looking into the cracked mirror of alienation and saying, look at where we are. I mean, Eliot's The Wasteland was all about that. But there's another side to it too. You can only do that for so long, otherwise you have no more impetus to go on.
That there has to be, let's go here. Yeah. There has to be some kind of healing. There can only be so much of this existential angst and Well,
Well, you see, Sartre, he came up to a tree, you said, and he put his finger on the tree, and he said, life is absurd because I cannot understand that tree. I cannot get my soul into that tree. Well, the Zen patriarchs have been talking about this for 1,500 years. And you weren't supposed to get your consciousness into the tree. You were supposed to pay such tremendous attention to the tree that it came to find you.
yes,
In the
Sartre
end, yeah.
said nature is mute, which
Yeah.
is to me one of the most amazing statements any 20th century philosopher has made in terms of defining alienation. I think that would have to be it.
Well, I don't think the French have been very successful with their philosophers over the last 350 years. If I was to make a
they are
statement.
they're welded to materialism. Well, so at this conference, there's been a lot of talk about hope. Where do the poets come down? Are you singing a funeral dirge for a world passing away, or is this the bright birth of the new young prince?
Well, hopefully, hopefully neither in some ways, because you simply have to speak life as it is. So at this time we're speaking tremendous change. We're speaking the stakes are very high. You can fail in life. An individual human being can fail in life. A species can fail in life. I mean, in some ways we always live out our destiny, no matter what we do. It just depends what level you want to live out that destiny. Do you want to live out your destiny on the level of frustration? Because you can do that. Or do you want to step further and deeper into it? So poetry always says the stakes are very high. And it relies on the fact that life itself is magnificent. You speak about the magnificence of life, not in a Pollyannish sense, or in a sense in which you're going to ignore all the difficulties and terrible beauties of life, but in the sense that it's magnificent because you can fail at it. And we as a species can fail. So the hope of the poet is that you can speak to the magnificence of life such that people will be reminded that life is magnificent and you can fail at it, and the stakes are very, very high, the stakes of your life.
So that's almost a bardic manifesto. Well, do you feel moved to speak some poetry? We'll move from talking about poetry to speaking poetry.
Yes, well, we spoke about the tree earlier and having the world come and find you, and I'm reminded of a very simple poem, but this is a very powerful poem for me. It's a teaching story, actually, out of the Northwest Indian tradition, where the story is there to tell a young boy or girl what to do when they're lost in the forest, or to answer the question. When the young boy or girl asks the question, what do I do when I'm lost in the forest? The elder tells this story. It's been rendered into marvelous modern English by David Wagoner, who has the chair of poetry at the University of Washington in the Northwest United States. And it's a very simple poem called Lost. And here it says, take the burden off your shoulders, basically, the story. And he says, the young boy or girl says to the elder, what do I do when I'm lost in the forest? And the elder says, stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. And you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. Listen, listen. The forest breathes. It whispers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again saying, here. Saying, here. If you leave it, you may come back again saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, then you are surely lost. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, then you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you.
Alexander Shulgin, Sasha to his friends, is nothing less than the godfather of psychopharmacology, an expert on the cyclicized phenylethylamines, that is, psychoactive compounds useful in the emotional recovery of traumatic events. Shulgin has given his life to the study of the pharmacology of the psychedelic experience. In Prague, he told me, greater frontiers lie ahead. The next lost continent to be explored by Alexander Shulgin, the psychoactive tryptamines. Sasha suggested that I join him for a stroll among the graves of the cemetery of the Jewish ghetto of Prague, Europe's oldest ghetto. There, walking among the stones, we reminisced and speculated about the history and the future of psychopharmacology. What do you make of your Russian colleagues here?
I'm fascinated by what he's doing, and I'm intrigued by his ability to get out what he is doing into the West, because the status of a physician in Russia is not what we have come to respect in the West.
You're talking about Yevgeny Krupinski.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I imagine you don't view ketamine with... Well, how do you view ketamine?
It's an anesthetic, and it's a dissociative thing, and it puts me out of body.
It's very dissociative. It puts me out of mind.
You're away, and I, frankly, with a full bladder, like being here. And you suddenly realize that someone has a full bladder, and at only one intellectual level you realize it's you.
Yes. No, it's so seriously disassociated me that I felt it was a great victory when I finally realized that this was a drug. Mm-hmm. For a long time I couldn't figure out what it was or who was even asking the question.
They kept calling it vitamin K, which is a fascinating euphemism for allowing to have some semblance of a food additive for a dietary supplement. But
well,
I had the interesting pleasure of being back at a big company in the East the day they had bought the rights to distribute ketamine. And I informed them, you do realize that ketamine is being made by Park Davis and shipped off to Mexico, and it's imported in liter bottles, all with a percentage of preservative, and comes right back into California in the trunk of the car. And they were shocked and did not know there was any abuse whatsoever.
Never could have conceived of human abuse.
About 20 years ago, there's a class of compounds called quincuclidines. And for about 3 or 4 years, I just noticed that there's no publishing in the Russian literature whatsoever on the area of quincuclidines. And then all of a sudden, the Russian literature started publishing. And then we went into a sort of a gap. And then quincuclidine benzoate, which is one of the most potent of the anticholinergics, was suddenly revealed that the Russians were working on it as a chemical warfare agent. And then we were working on it as a defense against their chemical warfare agent.
Uh-huh.
And it's actually 10, 20 micrograms.
10, 20 micrograms.
It makes you really wonky. It's like atropine. Delusion, confusion.
Uh-huh.
But they design these fantastic bombs that they can explode and send out millions of little hypodermic needles. And so they don't have to worry about wind blowing it downwind or upwind.
So it's essentially a chemical cluster bomb.
Cluster bomb, but with little hypodermic needles. Yeah, elegant.
So that's probably in the inventory.
It's already in the inventory.
Uh-huh. Well, someone mentioned to me that you had expressed interest now that you felt you had sort of done the work you wanted to do with cyclicized phenylethylamines, and that you were going back to looking at tryptamine.
Very much so. That's the other side of the coin. It's as rich and unexplored areas of phenethylamines were 20 years ago.
So are you going to illuminate it for us?
Oh, absolutely. I've already made the T-butyl methyl, isopropyl methyl is well known, but the secondary butyl methyl is not known. They're all active by smoking.
Uh-huh. And what are they? Could you, in a blind test, pick one out from another, or are they sort of...
I don't know yet. I doubt it somehow. I think they're all going to be fast, impactful, and all very much like DMT.
Duration-wise, or presentation-wise?
Probably perhaps a little bit more potent.
A little bit more potent?
Because DMT is not that all-fired potent. It takes, 10, 20, 50, no more, 50, 100 milligrams.
50 to 70
And some days we're getting into maybe at 20 and 30 milligrams, but not active oral. You have to get up to a certain degree of shrubbery on the nitrogen to get oral activity.
And how many of these compounds do you imagine there are that are
At
simple
casually
variants?
you can make 30, 40, 50.
Why do you suppose it is that this fast-acting, easily manufactured, spectacular hallucinogen is so rarely met in the underground?
I don't know. I've heard that it's there in some quantity. I heard about a seizure in Boston, I believe it was of ayahuasca. And they seized it on the basis that it contained DMT.
Right, that was the Santo Daime people from Brazil. But, you know, we live in a society where people jump out of airplanes and hang by bungee cords over bridges. And DMT, which is always described as an easy synthesis,
It is extremely easy.
is just not there.
I have no idea.
It violates one of these economic laws,
basic laws.
Gresham or Graham or somebody. Something that I've always wanted to ask you, which is, unlike me, you seem remarkably resistant to what I call the implications. I mean, how can you just do these things over and over again and not be nutty as a fruitcake?
So?
Well, are you?
I think
are
so.
you?
I think I relaxed in the event.
But unlike me, you don't feel the need to rave about that aspect of it.
Not particularly. I'd rather quietly stay half in the closet and continue doing what I'm doing.
But you've probably seen more uncharted internal landscape than half of mankind put together. I mean, that would not be an immodest claim.
They're a little bit charted now.
Well, a very little bit.
Very little, that's right. But the seeds are there to be used by anyone else. That's the reason for the book, just to get it all recorded into a documented form.
But it always puzzles me. I mean, I think Hoffman and Wasson, and certainly to some degree Schultes, to some degree you, everybody says, well, I'm just a humble botanist, or I'm just a hard-working workbench chemist. Nobody wants to actually say, this must be very, very important. Because it's so uniquely beyond ordinary expectation.
Yes, but the importance is going to take a long time to realize. What you can't build without the tools, and you have to have the tools, and these are the tools that allow the building to be done. I'm not a builder. I'm a tool maker. And that's probably one of the reasons I've not described a lot of landscapes. Others see them differently.
If we could compare it to the invention of the telescope, probably within 50 years of the invention of the telescope, the major solar system new paradigms were put in place. This seems very elusive. It seems hard for us to go beyond simply saying it exists, it's really far out, and then we sort of fall silent. What do you think about that?
I think the silence is in part imposed upon us by a very unsympathetic authority body. And maybe it's just as well. Because that way a lot of work can be done and sort of recorded for posterity. And the time the pendulums swing, they will swing back. And the time will come when this work will be used. Research will be done with these tools that will be great.
Well, obviously you believe in it strongly. What would you say to a critic who said, what's so great about this? Are you and your friends in any significant way different from the rest of humanity?
No. And I don't see why it would be critical. I'm not offending him. I can see no way in which I'm offending him. I'm quietly doing my little alchemist thing at home.
But you really must think that it does make a difference.
I think it does. I think it will.
It will.
I don't think it does now.
So we really are cursed with being pioneers.
Yeah.
It's not so bad.
No,
it's not so bad.
It has a nice
I mean, they'll
feel
hang
to it.
your picture in the main hall years hence and say, these were giants.
I would rather have my picture hanging in the main hall than me hanging in the main
Well,
hall.
some people manage both.
Well, that's
and you may end up that way, too.
Oh, well, it's a short, happy life. It's kind of neat.
Well,
But this is your territory, too. What's your feeling? Do you feel that that's a fair...
I think that I have always, from the very first psychedelic experience, had the uncanny intuition that, yes, this has been around for 50,000 years, but it's somehow going to be critically important in our lifetime, that we will need it for something. maybe just to think our way out of the mess that we're getting into.
But if it's needed, we have it.
Yes.
That's the beauty. The tool is there for the time when the need is obvious. And this may be our lifetime.
So essentially what you're doing is you're placing tools on the shelf. Screwdrivers for screws that haven't been invented
made exactly
yet.
That. Except it's a good tool. Its use will depend upon someone who has that particular view of need.
Well, it's a wonderful thing. Where do you hope to be in 10 years or so with all of this?
Probably starting on a third book.
Do you think, I know you're working on a book about legalization and...
Not actually. I'm working with a group who is more or less funded to make arguments that would be raised, to address arguments to be raised in the legalization process. What would be the answer of how drugs would be legalized? How would they be made available? Should it be an open supermarket? It should be under some sort of governmental control. And it's a research, more than that, a policy group
studies
setting up for that. I think it's futile in the present state.
In terms of practical impact.
I don't think anyone's going to seriously entertain legalization. So it may be a fueled process, but it's a fun process, because in the process you begin evaluating your own relationship to drug law, drug regulation, drug control.
If you were in charge of it, how do you see it happening? I mean, are there drugs you would keep legal, or do you think it should be...
What I would do if I were running, I would keep certain laws that would protect people of innocence. I would have absolutely no drug with children who are of too young an age. God knows what that age may be.
16, 18, 21.
Maybe alcohol moderate.
Right.
Absolutely unallowed giving drugs to anyone without their consent.
Naturally.
Informed consent, knowledge, education. I would make absolutely available at all levels without propaganda, restriction, information that is factual about drugs. Then I'd open the drugstore. And you people, would they overuse? Maybe. But I think that would very quickly dampen itself out to maybe about what we have now. But you have removed the criminality, removed the violence, removed the entire social disruptiveness that these drug laws have caused.
Would you encourage the government to see these drugs as a vehicle for gaining tax revenue, or do you think the government should stay off that?
Probably some tax revenue would be valid, as with other drugs of abuse, other things of abuse.
Similarly to alcohol and tobacco.
It's a good model, and perhaps it's a valid one.
Well, that's pretty much what I suggested in my book, but I agree with you that it's easy to sit down and come up with a fine plan, overcoming the political hurdles of an American...
Many people have too much to benefit on the laws being what they are, and even becoming more intense. And until you change that motivation, that reward...
Yes, well, the most cynical and the most naive people in America are keeping the drug problem going. The most cynical by dealing and importing drugs, and the most naive through the kind of Christian terror of...
Look at the monstrous industries that have been built up with it. The drug urine screening, shameful.
Right.
But they're multi-billion-dollar things. This kit, that GCMS, this instrumentation, these people who make little wax urine bottles. It's becoming... There's no justification for urine screening at any time of anyone, under any circumstance, on a random basis.
Well, and the notion that in a democratic society people would get into that kind of thing is incredible, I think.
It's completely contrary to the principles of that society. The assumption of innocence. We blew it because it's not in the Constitution.
Right.
It should have been in it, but it wasn't.
Right.
But taking a urine sample on a random basis is an assumption of guilt.
Well, but what is in the Bill of Rights is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Declaration of Independence. But that could be used as a sufficient basis
it's a
for...
self-image, and we should maintain it as such.
Yeah, well, the first thing that goes when society hits the wall is democracy.